There is a lot about the brain that we are yet to discover, which is why it's such an exciting topic to study, and why it's so important that new material is consistently covered on this channel. But the mysteries of the brain are also what makes some diseases so terrifying and unstoppable. Although nowadays there are new advances in medicine that can lessen the impact of many neurodegenerative diseases, there are still some diseases that are so peculiar and unbelievable that medicine is unhelpful. One of these is called Kuru, derived from the word kuria, which means to shake. Kuru made a forceful, undeniable appearance amongst the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, and both the symptoms and the way in which the disease was transmitted are incredible. Now, before we get into this video, I want to let you know that here at Top 5's HQ, in between researching and all the work we do here, we have been cozying up on the dark nights and playing the mobile game Raid Shadow Legends. We are sure you will agree that for a mobile game, it has some impressive 3D graphics. You can get lost in the storyline, win fights and collect champions. It's the very latest release by RPG, and you can get on it for free by clicking the links in the description to get 50,000 silver immediately, and a free epic champion as part of the new player program, courtesy of the dev team. Don't forget to support today's sponsor by clicking on the link in the description or in the comments. And now, let's get into this video. To understand Kuru disease, it's first useful to have some insight into neurophysics. The human body contains prion proteins. All humans have prion proteins in their body, mostly in their nervous systems, and contrary to what you might think, prion proteins by themselves are not actually harmful, although their normal functions are not well known. Prion proteins are thought to contribute to memory consolidation and spatial learning, and they play some sort of major supportive role in the nervous system. While we may not know exactly what they do, when they are normal, we have a pretty good idea of what prion proteins do when they misform and become toxic. They become extremely dangerous and are commonly called prions. What is even stranger is that scientists are not really clear on what causes prion misfolding, only that it happens and the consequences are destructive and often impossible to correct. Prions are infectious particles that cannot be treated by any conventional means. This is because they do not have DNA or RNA, like parasites and bacteria. It's unknown how to target a prion and render it harmless, which makes the resulting diseases so destructive. Prions are thought to be the cause of mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which induces strange behaviour in cows. And if humans eat infected meat from these cows, it's possible, but rare, for them to develop a human form of mad cow disease. Prions may also be responsible for other diseases, such as fatal insomnia in humans, scrapie in sheep, and chronic wasting disease in deer. All of these diseases are fatal, and they tend to emerge quickly and kill slowly. Kuru is a prion disease, and although it's not common nowadays, it did commonly occur amongst the 4 people, a tribe of about 11,000 people who lived in the Okapa district of Papua New Guinea. This tribe was defined by their bizarre funeral custom. 4 women would remove the brain of the corpse, season it, and cook it in pieces of bamboo. Male members of the tribe would not usually eat the brain or other parts of the body, but if they did, they only ate muscle meat. However, the women, and sometimes the children, would consume the cooked flesh and portions of the brain. Female bodies were thought to be able to contain the spirit of a dead body, so eating the corpse was considered the cultural duty of the women. Eating the body was an act of affection and mourning, as consuming the flesh would spare the loved one from being ravaged by maggots and worms. It could also have been a way to keep their loved ones with them even after death. In some cases, the bodies would even be exhumed after being buried for days and then eaten. But members of the 4 began to develop odd illnesses. They tried to look for answers, and some thought it could be due to sorcery. But an anthropologist who studied 4 customs suspected that the funeral rites were to blame, and proved that 4 people who had consumed the bodies often developed Kuru disease. Women developed the disease 8 times more often than men, since they were eating the brain portions that were most contaminated with prions. Children who had also been fed infected material also got sick. The disease sometimes takes years to show up, although usually it would manifest itself within a few weeks. Early symptoms include difficulty walking without stumbling or losing balance, shaking, which corresponds to the name of the disease itself, problems with speech, and loss of muscle control, which resulted in violent twitching and rocking back and forth. These early symptoms would be called the ambulant stage, as the victim could still walk. However, at this stage, the dementia that occurs in the latter stages of Kuru would not be present at this time, so it's safe to assume that the victim would be very aware that something was seriously wrong with their body. Later, this would progress to a sedentary stage, when victims would no longer be able to walk and only be able to sit up, and the tremors would get much worse. They would become very confused and would appear drunk due to the damage done to their nervous system. The victims may also exhibit depression or emotional volatility. During this stage of the disease, they would sometimes exhibit the strangest symptoms of the illness: laughter. This laughter would be uncontrollable and happen without cause. It's one of the most well-known indicators that the disease is progressing, and easily one of the most haunting. Over time, the unprovoked laughter would stop as exhaustion and neural decay set in. The reflexes would erode, and the victims would no longer be able to sit up. The inability to sit up would indicate that the terminal stage had set in. The victims would have a hard time swallowing, which would prevent them from eating the food they needed to remain strong. Even though they may still be awake, they would become unresponsive and unable to control their bowel movements. Their physical decay and the lack of control would often lead to open sores and wounds on their bodies. These would usually become infected. The nervous systems of the victims would be so compromised that their brains would look very different from healthy brains. Death would usually result from infection or other complications due to the disease. The entire process often took a year to run its course, but in some cases only lasted a few months. The disease was so horrible to the Fore people that for a time there were entire Fore villages without women. However, there was an unusual benefit that some of the villagers gained from the illness. It appeared that some members of the Fore community carried a gene that seemingly protected them from Kuru and other prion diseases. The Fore people stopped cannibalism in the 1950s, which led to a major decline in Kuru. However, cases continue to appear for a long time after because, like we said, Kuru symptoms can often take years to manifest. However, miraculously, some of those affected survived the epidemic. These survivors were studied, and it was discovered that they had a genetic mutation now titled V127. This mutation likely helped protect them from prion illnesses. To test this, scientists engineered mice to have V127 mutations. These mice were resistant to not only Kuru, but also CJD, the human version of mad cow disease. It is possible that the Fore people may have evolved resistant to prion illnesses, and if their funeral practices had continued uninterrupted, they may have become resistant altogether. A doctor of neurodegenerative illnesses states this is a striking example of Darwinian evolution in humans. The epidemic of prion disease selecting a single genetic change that provided complete protection against an invariably fatal dementia. However, to get anywhere near that stage, Kuru disease would have had catastrophic impact on the society it scourged. The Fore people had regional groups with their own separate names and dialects. Some of these groups were as small as 40 people altogether, and some groups were as large as 525 people. Long after Fore people had stopped eating corpses, they were still able to name women and men who had died from Kuru. In a 20-year time span, about 2,500 Fore people died from Kuru. Most of these deaths were women, and the imbalance created long-lasting problems for the community. A 1962 sample of 125 men revealed that 63 men had only dead wives, 10 of them were single. Often, women would die of Kuru after childbirth, and it was common for families to have a missing mother, meaning fathers would have to take on multiple roles to cope with the loss. The disease became so severe that speeches for marriage often included directions on how to manage the bride's possible death within the next few years after her wedding. And men would sometimes pray together that brides would survive to give birth. Sometimes aggression would break out between Fore groups in attempts to learn who could be responsible for causing such pain for the people. Fore meetings would often discuss Kuru and analyse whether or not sorcery could be responsible. Today, many Fore people assist researchers with their work on prion illnesses. although many of them still believe sorcery is responsible. It's believed the last victim of Kuru died before 2010.